Hi everyone, I am Stephen Drew from the Architecture Social, and I'm pleased to be here with a very special guest that I've known for many years, and I've been quite impressed with all the fascinating stuff that you've been doing in terms of the BIM sector, in terms of architecture, kind of moving and shaking, and you've done a few TED Talks as well, and you currently are BIM Lead at Berkeley Modular, and your background as well in BIM, you're a BIM manager and BIM Lead at EPR Architects. Rene, hello, how are you?
Hi, Stephen. Are you good? Yeah, it's been more than 5 years, I think. So yeah, it's actually not a short time. I just have to correct you. Not TED Talks. I've been in Autodesk and some BIM talks. It's just before people think I've been on TED.
Oh, fair. Yeah. You will get to TED Talks one day.
Later on. Yeah, cool.
It's always good to have a goal in mind, but hey, it's fantastic in terms of Autodesk. That's really great. So what's probably an important distinction? So recently as well, we can briefly talk about your roots in terms of architecture. And currently right now, what you do is you're working for Berkeley, a large, successful, very commercially driven, good projects as well, developer. But let's go way back when. So your grassroots in terms of you studied architecture and your background, are you an architectural technician or technologist?
No, architect. Yeah. Cool. An architect. So studied in South Africa in my hometown. I did all kinds of commercial and residential, all the way from big villas to little extensions to factories and stuff. Then came to the UK. Had to kind of start not from bottom up, but just kind of relearn things that I didn't know. Doing some extensions in Knightsbridge and some basements. But I was always frustrated with the way the architecture design process worked. It just didn't feel right. It's messy and rework. And when I kind of really looked at BIM, that's when I kind of it started making a little bit of sense, or at least in the right direction. So that's why I stepped away from purely architecture, just to get closer to that. And yeah, it's been a journey for the last, let's say, 7 years. Seen how different approaches happen in that. I've seen progression and I've seen regression. I've also seen how different industries are trying, or different sectors, all the way from interior to architects to engineering. So it's interesting. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, there's quite a lot of different steps we talked about there, and what's really quite interesting for anyone that's even still maybe they work in mainstream architecture now. You consciously chose to have a career in BIM, and what was that transition like at first from moving away from mainstream architecture to strategic BIM implementation?
Yeah, I was warned not to do it. So I was still at Perkins & Will at that point. My kind of director told me, "Watch out! It's a phase, or it's going to fade out, and just be careful that you don't commit to it. And in a few years, it's watered down." So. It was a little bit of a scary suggestion, but for me, actually, the ultimate goal was to to be on the other side of the table, kind of on the client side. So I felt that is one way to get there. But I also just felt being in the architecture field, you can't necessarily change it. I needed to be able to step out of it and have an overseeing kind of role. So it was a risk, definitely a risk then. Didn't know as much as I know now. So I had to kind of semi-fake it till I make it a little bit here and there, and kind of there's many people who know BIM a lot more than or better than me, or at least a lot of book knowledge about it. But I don't think that is really what BIM is about. So yeah, it was a scary step to take.
I find that quite interesting, and I like it. I like what you touched upon, practical experience, and it's like everything in life. And I've had the same thing where, for instance, I used to run my own recruitment company, and until you actually do it for a while, I remember at first I was quite embarrassed to say I was a director, because I was like, I'm not really a director. What do I know? And I think it comes over from time and experience and making mistakes and learning, and a lot of it, or even now in my current role, involves management. And I've never managed people before, and that is a completely different skill set that you learn, and half of it's through doing mistakes. And sometimes, in terms of management, or I've learned not to be too overbearing or anything like that. And then on the other hand, on the flip side of the coin is if you're a bit too chilled or relaxed, then things don't happen. And then you get from the higher powers, they're like, what's going on? And then you end up. And so what's really interesting is you talked a bit about book and a level knowledge of BIM. We talked about practical application. You talked about people as well, but that's where the interesting challenge for me has come from in terms of BIM, is that effectively we've got the theory, but when you're steering a large architectural practice, or like now in development, and you're dealing with different people's different perceptions of BIM. You could be working with the architect who completely sees the future in it, the whiz kid who is good at it, and then you've got the tried and tested architect that's like, Rene, I'm good at AutoCAD. Yeah, I don't need BIM. I'm doing the detail. So you've had to juggle with all these personalities. How has that been over the years, or have you learned a lot of lessons there?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was at DPR, we were trying to turn the whole firm of 200 people into Revit users, and BIM understanding from 30 or something like that. It's just a huge task, and I had all of those personalities. So, and to be honest, there's a valid thing in all of that. The problem is you get people who they just talk BIM, but they don't know how to put a building together. They don't know how to plan production, so they can't even put it. They don't know how to just bubble out on a paper how they're going to put a detail together. And those are usually the ones that are the worst ambassadors for BIM. And then I've seen people who spend 30 years in the industry, and for the first time they see their details on a screen, and they realize it either doesn't work, or they would have realized on site. And the excitement and how that excitement then reaches them, where they can test their designs, that those amazing CAD details they've done in a better way. So I've seen people turn around. I've done training with directors, because that's the biggest challenge with BIM in any kind of firm, is the top brass that doesn't necessarily, for them, they've got their pressures. It's all about money. How you plan a CAD project versus BIM project is completely different. It's not sheet based. It's development. It's building virtually, and that's a mindset change. So I've actually sat with directors in a room, gave them a puzzle, said, one of you've got the picture. You know how the puzzle needs to explain to the others how to build that puzzle. And that's kind of so if you think about CAD days, you kind of had a need to know approach. So someone would sit in the corner, look, you just need to know how to do this toilet cubicle. No, you can't do that. The most junior person on that team actually will have to learn very quickly how to put a building together, because they're going to put it together on a computer. Which is actually a good thing, so that incremental growth could be quicker if we approach it right.
It's really interesting, and I quite like the bits you highlight as well. That is really important. Your experience in the industry, which informs BIM. So then you're looking at it from a practical application. You're seeing how the architects have built it because you've been one yourself. You've been in that position, so you can properly advise on that process and kind of adapt from there. That's what I find really interesting. And I tell you what, touching upon it, because we've known each other for over those years, and I think a lot of recruitment that I've done has been involved in BIM, and there's so many angles to it. There's so many different theories. Everyone has different weird and wonderful ways. And I've heard it all as well, Rene, to one or two business owners go to me, Steve, why should I even bother with BIM? And in the end, I turn around and go, if you don't want to do BIM, don't do BIM. Hey, everyone else is doing it, but it's up to you. If you want to get left behind, hey, that's your risk. I'm not going to tell you're on your building. Whereas I think there's a little bit of that sometimes. And I think now, though, the general consensus, though, in London is that I think that the large majority of practices are there or moving towards there. And, your role in terms of EPR, actually, what's quite interesting, they were one of the first. And what's interesting, and from that, because you're a man who's traveled the world and come to the UK and you work here now. But actually, the UK, we were far behind compared to a lot of the world at the time in terms of the BIM process. So it's completely getting there now. I mean, to touch upon it briefly, what have you seen much change since joining the EPR in 2015 to just before you were your next step or the BIM world? How has it changed?
The funny thing is, I don't think it has changed. I think there's a there's a plateau that's been reached, and excuse me, it's a lot of architects and or consultants have taken on BIM, but it's a surface layer. So it is, we do BIM, we do it because it's kind of needed, or it's the new thing, but we really don't commit to it. So our drawings are still our final results, and we'll give you a model, but the model doesn't necessarily, you can't really look at it. So we're still stuck in a semi-CAD world, and it's still the majority of firms are doing that. So we're not putting out. We can't. Well, it's obviously there's many factors. You can't put your neck out and take that risk. So there needs to be a next step, next change where it's, what, we're working in this geometry. Let's move design intent. Make sure that design intent can be built. And it ties in really nicely to the golden thread. And don't do a planning model and dump it and then do something else, or then a subcontractor resolves your issues, take it through. So only then we really get the results.
It's really interesting, and I appreciate. It's. I've seen a few. There's been an example in terms of recruitment many years ago where I helped find a BIM manager a job at a successful architecture practice. And I've had both examples where, for instance, where an architectural practice embraces BIM, pushes on, and they really, really help that BIM manager. And that you have that relationship you were talking about before, if you actually have the backing of the directors and it trickles down, and therefore that person can make a lot of change. AHMM is a really good example of a good employer that had that. And then I've got one or two examples as well, where I remember before a company was asked for a BIM manager, like, we need a BIM manager, Steve. And then this person rocks up and, we're going to change. And then it was the other example of, so imagine you're there, you're the BIM guy in the corner, and then there was an aspect of some of the directors weren't on board. It was like, well, we've got that project and we're not going to change that because that's in MicroStation. And, and it goes back to that thing of, do you really want to push BIM? And then there's a level of it at some point where it's like, if you don't want to do it, that's fine. But don't then say you're going to do, because basically with BIM, everyone needs to be committed for it to move along, and the whole process. And that's why I felt that the really good skill of a good BIM manager, and it requires a lot of patience and it requires a lot of these skills, but actually you're effectively change agents, and half of it is winning over people. So how many countless times have you been in that situation where you slowly chip away and you get everyone to come with you, right?
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's not a skill that they put on the job descriptions or anything like that, but it can make or break it. You either end up being just you just fall into what suits, and you just maintain templates and you just go with it, or you get in there, you get into the legal aspects, you get into the why are people struggling to adopt it? There's many approaches from, take on that first project, try and put everything in there, make it a success, but it doesn't always translate to the next project. It's never a smooth, we're going to grow from this project and it snowballs to the next. So yeah, and then there's sometimes it's a half in, half out manager / architect. The
one person in the office was like, "Oh, give BIM to Jeff." That happens a lot in architecture smaller architecture practices as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, probably medium ones as well. So it's. I think the ones that are really successful is with those directors, because you won't see the success immediately. You won't see the benefits of it. It's a long-term game, but once it's there, you can do more. It takes you a bit longer to get there, but you can do more. You can show more. You can probably, you tap into better technologies where you could probably give better data. You can start tapping into maybe computational design and all of those kind of things. But yeah, it's top down, but you've got to have that skills, I would say.
Well, I think there's some definite pearls of wisdom out there, and maybe there's some nodding heads in the BIM community. But the point is, you got to keep with it, and you can actually you can make a positive change, and you've seen that happen at EPR. So moving on from EPR, because it's quite exciting in terms of the next step of your career, which I would love to. I think it'd be a great little fascinating to discuss the fact that so at EPR Architects is a traditional architectural practice, a good commercial architectural practice, and you were involved in that process. So what you now do is you work at Berkeley Developments. In particular, you are the BIM lead for the modular division, which I think is quite cool, because in my head I imagine you kicking ass, doing the BIM in the factories with the robots. I kind of in my head feel there's a bit of that Tesla thing, where you're on the cutting edge and you've got the factories. But do you want to give like a little mental picture to anyone listening of what it is like? At a developer, but then maybe the modular aspects of that and how it all ties in with BIM.
So I was pleasantly surprised when I found the role. I kicked a few tires after my previous role, because I know that the variances in what is out there in the roles as far as the BIM career path. What it is, a BIM manager in one office is a BIM coordinator in another office, those kind of things. You work either as a consultant or you are project specific, so on and so forth. So I tested the waters from contractors to consultants to big firms, that big names and all of that. And then I took a chance. I was like, okay, this is interesting. Job description had 50-60% of it I've never heard of. So it wasn't just so the title was a BIM title, but then there was lean principles, there was MES, there was fabrication items mentioned in there. Okay, well, let's give it a go. So and what I was pleasantly surprised. I was blown away after the first meeting. So BIM is the way I can sum it up, BIM is a methodology that is trying to bring us to where manufacturing's always been. So or not always been, but is. So manufacturing takes logic. They learn, they stop, they don't reinvent the wheel. If you think about car industry, you'll have one chassis that will be used by many different companies. You might have a dashboard. There's place for buttons, but not all of the buttons are in there. But there's a very it's kind of, you step away and you look at it. You don't reinvent an apartment, because an apartment is, there's 2-3 bedrooms, da da da. So I was really pleasantly surprised. And then what I find is, so obviously we are driving to have digital twins built, and that's going to literally be used by machines to. First of all, we're going to have really funky robot arms that will pick up steel and weld. So that will be in November. So we're looking forward to that.
Wow.
And then we'll have machines cutting boards, moving them along, all of that. There's a human component always at the end, finishing things off. But for the first time in my career, something will be built directly off a model that I'm producing, or my team are producing. So it is so important. The model is all of a sudden the most important thing. We are trying to create a manufacturing principle, but we have half our foot still in a traditional design process. So part of what my team is doing, we're trying to bridge that gap. So from stage 0, and we're in a fortunate position where most other modular companies are, let's say, subcontractors. So they get involved later on, like contractors would, which is a big problem in the BIM process methodology, because if the stakeholders aren't involved early on, decisions get made later, and then it makes changes. So we're in a position where we can drive how things need to be done so that we can have a seamless flow of geometry and data. So from the day Berkeley decides that site's going to be modular, we're in there. So for me, that's the first opportunity where I can see I can actually use BIM properly. It's and to be honest, we actually don't even talk about BIM that much, because it's beyond that, and I'll get into that. So it starts with our EIR, where we actually say, look, this is how you do it, this is what you use. Our stage 2 models that are get designed are actually, we know that it could be built. So It's not just a planning approved model. It's actually that model we know can be built, and there is a 20% left of a refinement.
It's fascinating to me. It's where I find it interesting. What you were talking about is because you have complete access to the factory. You are the developer. You are building this stuff. You are effectively laser printing. Like me and the student, when you're laser printing, you've got that feedback of basically if you don't set up that model correctly, then it can print out, and it's like stuff like the lessons that, you've got the laser printing or the plastic printer before. If you set it up wrong, you can get £100 bill as a student. And I've had that before because I didn't make the insides hollow. And you're like, oh no, I've racked up this massive cost. But then at the same time, I remember before with certain laser cutters and processes that if you don't print stuff in a certain way, they actually don't fit. And I'm talking about things very basic, but effectively when you've got this, it's what you're talking about for in terms of Berkeley developments and what you're doing in modular. There's effectively, it does go out to a factory, and you are talking about apartments. You're talking about amazing stuff. And the advantage I see and why I'm actually on board with modular is you're not replacing quote unquote traditional ways. There's a revolution to it. But what I quite like is it could be the end solution is if you get down all this process, and what you're on about is the BIM process and all that involved, if you can get them decisions in and you effectively keep the cost down, then that goes to the end user. And what we're talking about is potentially even solutions for the housing crisis, where you can rack up good quality housing or modular housing and make a difference. But it really is, you are doing it for real. That's the difference, isn't it? You've got the factory, you're there working out the process, and you're going ahead with it. We're not talking about something which is conceptual. You're doing it live.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't built anything yet. It's going to go next year, but we're making amazing progress. We are not only in, the factory is the last bit of it. It's preparing for it. The type of drawings we are doing is IKEA assembly type drawings. It's different. But we can only get there if by the end of stage 3, everything is aligned, and you can trust that whole process has been properly done, so that it's coordinated. So it's a challenge. I mean, to first of all, fees, for instance, you're pushing a little bit more work early on in stage 2 already. So that needs to change. So squeezing architects' fees very early on doesn't help, because they actually will resolve stage 3 level information already in stage 2. MEP much earlier on. For us, it's at that granular level in that apartment. We need to know the insulation around those things. We need to know which equipment, the real equipment, is going to be used. So we've thrown out the LOD process. We've written our own matrix because it doesn't tie into REBA stages. We want more, much earlier. And then we have our internal client, which is ultimately the factory right next door, which, I don't want some angry guy with the iPad coming up and say, well, I've just sent 20 tons of materials down here and it's wrong. Can't hide from it. So, and that is scary, but it's actually in our virtual environment, we can test it, we can run analysis, we can do all of those things. And again, by gateways and methodologies, if get there. So
it's interesting. And so you're effectively coordinating your own team now. So what would be really interesting for anyone that's kind of curious on, mainly they working in mainstream architectural practice, and we're talking about working for a developer. What have you learned in terms of yourself, or maybe more on your team? What kind of personalities do really well in this environment? Because I imagine it's a completely different scenario than mainstream architecture, and it might not work for everyone, but who kind of responds really well, and who becomes a valuable addition to the team?
So it's especially in Berkeley Modular, because we're actually a startup in a big business that's got very established ways of doing things. And we are breaking the rules a little bit, or we're pushing the boundaries. So just using Skype as new. So we are the kind of newbies in the factory somewhere in Kent that are using all kinds of tools that IT is not supporting yet, and all of those kind of challenges. But we are challenging because indirectly we are challenging the bigger Berkeley group, how they do things. Again, how do they appoint the consultants? That's got to change. They've got to be open for paying them that fees. They've got to accept that they've got to produce more detailed elements so that we can coordinate it. So it's a whole game change of that approach. So inside Berkeley Modular, it's really nothing is established. Things that I planned and templated a year and a half or something months ago, some of it's now doesn't look at all the same. So I continuously have to revise it, because it's not what I'm used to. It's not a standard template that you'll use in an architecture firm or anything, because we have different clients. We have a manufacturing, we use a procurement, we have a logistics, the guy who's going to swing the cranes around, different bits of information. I have automated information. We actually have now managed to generate hundreds of drawings in 10 minutes by pressing a button.
Wow.
We spent months and months understanding what needs to be on this drawing, and what's the logic. Can we what can we tell the program from that point to that point, always dimension. So to get back to your question, there's a little bit of basic understanding of our software, and then who knows? I can probably guarantee you in 2 years from now, the software we're using now, we won't potentially use, because things are changing. So it's someone who's willing to be able to operate in an environment where you roll up your sleeves, you open-minded. Someone who's also doesn't have tunnel vision. Step back and say, I just did this for a week. How can I do it in a day? And that's the manufacturing approach, which I've now started learning, lean approach, cut the waste, which I still find in our design consultants firms is still prevalent. And it depends also on star individuals that keeps things in their head and doesn't share. Where you have to jot it down. You have to put the business intelligence on paper so that things can move forward. So you don't have to go back and reinvent. So it's very broad, but yeah.
I like it. I think I quite enjoyed your analogy there of you respect Berkeley, you respect the old ways, but sometimes to get the company forward, you have to be the disruptor in a good way, because what you're on about is changing for the better. And I agree. It sounds like to me that the kind of person, and I liked your analogy where you're saying, look, you can use one piece of software, but you've got to move on. And it sounds like the person that works really well with you and your team is someone that's agile. And it's basically, it's the person that you can't hide like in a big architectural practice on a big team here. It's someone that's out there willing to change. And the other bit, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's like them skills you were on about in terms of having difficult conversations about BIM. You've got to be prepared to be on the, next year, as you said, on the factory floor now and doing all this stuff and dealing with personalities and kind of standing up for yourself. So, but on the other hand, you get the exciting aspect, don't you, then of you're part of something interesting. Every day is new. You get different tasks. You learn, as you say, you share, you giggle, you collaborate. But it sounds like there's a real nice team effort. And it sounds like it's not, quote unquote, a plug and play job. You're innovating. Everything's a bit different. Is that a fair analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm learning every day. My team's learning every day. We're actually much more technical than I've been for many years. So I actually need to understand and represent our brand or our product. So I've got to understand every nut and bolt of that element, and as a team as well. So it takes you out of that comfort zone, especially if you've been in a BIM position where you don't need to understand the building. Now I have to, but understanding the building makes me make better decisions as well in implementing technology and all of that. But yeah, you're right. I've got a lovely group of in my team who are pushing the boundaries. We all have the same goal. We want to see those machines run smoothly, but also we have the same passion about how the industry is going to learn from this. We already seeing changes in our interactions with consultants, and I think it's going to grow from there. So, yeah.
It's really fascinating. And I think, again, it's kind of being ahead of the curve, because we talked about modular. It's such an obvious choice for the future right now. But the more and more, even in terms of what I'm involved in terms of recruitment, the modular is definitely a prevalent sector, and it's definitely going to go that way. So I find that really interesting. In terms of, you mentioned next year you're going to be gearing up. You're going to be building things on site. It sounds like you're excited for architecture. What I was going to say now is it's a bit of a stressful time. I don't want to bang on about coronavirus because we're all fed up of the news. We're all fed up of that. It's a bit of a tough and tricky time as well. It's really good to hear that things are going out to factory and you're kind of gearing up for that next level. If, for instance, anyone's in a bit of an unfortunate situation right now where maybe they're in between jobs, or, like good companies that may be involved in the transport sector, they've suffered, and you have really good, talented people out there which could be demoralized. Do you have any tips or pearls of wisdom for someone currently looking for a job right now to soldier on?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, and let's face it, it's a bit of a unique downtrend. And I've been recruiting, so I've been seeing people who's come out of these companies. I found people that are still in comfort zones, or they're looking for the next comfort zone. It's very talented people, great CVs, put buildings together, but they're not willing to. They can't see that next step, and that's fair enough. I can see how coding, computational design will play a role, because you'll have your Lego blocks to play with. Have some standards. A lot of people think about modular as restrictive to design. I don't think it is, actually. So it's if you think about apartments, they're always rectangular. They always have a specific format. You don't have many round apartments or triangle apartments. They're always a certain set of rectangles or blocks or whatever. Once you can get over that, and you don't feel you need to do that, and then you can do the niceties, so the 80-20%. So the 80% solved, then do a nice facade, do the surrounding, do the core and the common areas, because that's where the nice things. So I've come across architects who are nervous about it, because it's like, you're taking away a lot of no. And the same with technology. We keep on talking about it. At some point, we're automating our drawings. Do we really need a big team? Yeah, we will. We will just do more, and we'll do it in a better way, and things like that. So, and there will be companies who will need less people if they embrace the technology, but it doesn't mean. It just means there's more efficiency, and it means there is more scope to do quicker things. Housing crisis is one example. If we can crack this and do these things in this efficient way, who knows? Maybe then we should be able to crack it. But the current every time we do a building, we reinvent that building approach is so dated. So my pearls of wisdom is just. There's no one specific skill necessary. I've seen people with computational and coding. Yes, those are important things, and they are on the edge of things. It's a willingness to kind of forget what you've learned and relearn. That's where the difference will be. And the people I've got here is all of them had that kind of attitude, saying, well, you know what? I'll give it a go. And it works. So, yeah.
I think that's great. And I'd like to add that while it is tough, there are definitely still jobs out there, and everyone can feel demoralized, but it's something we all have to go through. And I spoke to perhaps a client of mine, but also a good friend, David Drews, before, and he had a really good suggestion of sometimes, don't get too bogged down in the news. If you kind of follow all the time the R rating, you're going to drive yourself into this hole. And the point is, there are glimmer rights. It is going to be tough, but you have to soldier on. on a lighter note, I'd love to hear, Rene, what have you been up to in during coronavirus time to keep yourself enthusiastic and energized? Apart from kicking ass and taking names in the Berkeley group and doing awesome modular, what have you been up to? Guitars or anything like that?
No, just hiking and just hiking. Basically, hiking through the UK. Places that you would normally not go to, and then like, okay, get on a train, go in that direction. And then obviously I'm a bit of a workaholic, so I'm really passionate about what we're doing here. So I end up browsing and finding other solutions. But yeah, just hiking, coast, and all of that.
That's good. You've got to keep being outdoors, because even myself, you can quite easily get stuck in this hole right now, especially with working from home. It's quite easy to get sucked in. You're working from home, then you finish, then you're at home, and you're going round and round. And I think I learned as well is that you have to force yourself to get out, have that gym membership, or go out, as you say, go hiking is a perfect example. Be socially distanced, but it's important to get out there, because otherwise, you don't want to be stuck in front of the computer. I'm very conscious I say this while we're doing a digital interview, but it's the balance, isn't it? It's the balance.
Yeah.
So brilliant. Okay, that's fantastic. And you kindly said before, down the line we can do some awesome, maybe more literal examples of show and tell, or how the BIM process has plugged in on what you're up to. And I think that's great. So as well as that, now, if someone wants to reach out or they want to see all the work you've done and all the awesome things you're up to, where's the best way to find you, and where's the best way to find what Berkeley Modular is up to?
Yeah, I mean, by all means, link up with me on LinkedIn and have a chat. We don't publish too much on our website on Berkeley Modular. We are kind of quietly tinkering away, and then at some point see what we are achieving. So, by all means, every now and then I post a little bit of something on my LinkedIn. Kind of watch the space, because doing massive things that we will release once when we see our boxes go off. That's when we're going to celebrate and then expose a little bit.
Oh, I'm excited now. I'm going to keep my eyes peeled. I can't wait to see those updates, and I'm sure we can talk about them then. And I completely get it. You're kind of work in progress, you're learning every day. You're getting the stuff done. And I guess the point is we're going to be seeing all these awesome residential when they're fresh out of the factory. Who knows? You put me down for one, Rene. Okay. And hopefully we go way back. So hopefully I can get a little discount on the Berkeley.
I don't think I can get a discount, and I can't afford those. We're doing very high end stuff. So unfortunately, I'll see those boxes. Maybe we can arrange a truck to stop somewhere.
Yeah, maybe one day, right? One day, the see-through special. You can give me option B12 with the extra generous conservatory part. Thank you so much, Rene. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for your time.
All right, cheers, Stephen. Thank you.